we want to do is hand it off to Mayor Elorza. Mayor?
Well, thank you, Elena, and welcome to everybody who's tuning in right now. You know, I just want to begin by saying thank you to everybody who's played a role in putting this together. Thank you, Elena, for your work in the Tenant Network and for working with us on this. I also want to give a special shout out to Dr. Danny Ritchie. She's been one of the leading members on our African American Ambassador Group with a particular focus on housing. And you know that housing touches so much of what we care about and what we work on. So I really appreciate you continue to push these issues and advocate for our folks throughout the city. Thanks, Kyle Bennett from United Way. Appreciate you being involved in so many important initiatives. Jennifer Wood, we love you and we appreciate everything that you do to bring justice to our community. You know, I just started reading this book, Just Mercy. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And early in that book, you know, the author says that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. And, you know, Jennifer and I know everybody on this group, all we're looking to do is bring more justice to our community. And that will address many of the challenges and ills that we have. So, you know, to get going with this work, you know, I simply want to name something that underlies everything that involves our work, something that I'm sure we're all aware of, and that's the fact that housing is a major challenge in our city right now. It was a major challenge before COVID, and it's just a bigger challenge right now. And you know, when I think about the direction that the city is in, I'm still very, very bullish on Providence. I think Providence is still on an upswing, which means that we should expect to see a lot more investment and a lot more people choosing to make Providence their home. Now, I think that one of the great injustices in the world would be if, just as we're hitting that inflection point moving forward, that the people who have been here during the hard times, the people who lived here, raised their kids here, and grew up here, that they not be able to share in the progress that we've developed. And there has to be a way that we can avoid that. And there has to be a way that everyone, even the folks on the lowest rung of the economic ladder, that they can partake in the city's growth and the city's progress. So that's what I'm hoping that we accomplish through our collective efforts. You know, this is one piece of what the city is undertaking. In just about a week and a half, we're going to be announcing an affordable housing trust fund. So we know that we've been advocating for years for this to be a line item in the state's budget. And for the first time in the city's history, we're actually contributing city dollars to affordable housing. So I'm really, really proud of that. And that's one piece of this work. But another piece of this work is also making sure that tenants can continue to live in their properties, and that while we can, that we're also supporting our landlords, because they're an important part of the housing supply chain as well. I remember doing this work as an attorney, working at legal services. I represented hundreds and hundreds of tenants, and I saw the real difference that having an attorney makes in a person's life. Having an attorney is the difference between being able to either stay in your place or transition to a new place comfortably, versus coming home from work one day and seeing all your stuff thrown out on the street and all of it going into storage. There's another incredible book called Evicted that I recommend to everyone. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And there's another line that I want to share with you there. The author in that book makes a point that usually we think of eviction being a consequence of being poor, but he says it's the exact opposite. Being poor and living in poverty is a consequence of being evicted. So in other words, it's not poverty that causes eviction, it's evictions that cause poverty. And once you get evicted, it's so hard to dig your way out of that and to get your life and your household back in order. So working with everyone on this group, and I'm so proud to have everyone here, and I look forward to continue working with you so we can keep people in their homes, we can keep housing and household stability, and make sure that people have that basic stability in their lives so that they can flourish and reach all of their individual goals. So thank you so much, Elena, and thank you everyone for being a part of this. Really appreciate your partnership, and I look forward to a lot of good work that we're going to do together moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to let all of our participants know that if you have any comments or questions throughout this presentation, you can put them into the Q&A portion. We will be saving all of the question and answers for the end of this presentation. As well, I'd like to make sure that everyone knows that Spanish interpretation is available. With the interpretation function on at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So with that, I think we can go over to our next slide. We'll be looking at the housing crisis, as the mayor mentioned, that we've already had even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. To talk about that, we have Dr. Danny Ritchie, speaking on behalf of the African American Ambassador Housing Instability Subgroup. Dr. Ritchie.
Thank you very much for asking me to give a quick overview. And there's so much information that I want to share with you. So I'm going to probably talk really fast and make sure that what you really are seeing is just that there's going to be resources that you can go to and look at some of the history. Just for you to know, I'm a clinical assistant professor of family medicine. I also run the Community Health Innovations of Rhode Island. My interest is in health and understanding what are called the social determinants of health and inequity. And I focus on housing because in the social determinants of health, you're looking about where you live, learn, work, and play. And so where you live is your neighborhood and your housing. And these are the major contributions to your health. Medical care is just a really small part. And so part of this is really dissecting and understanding the structures and the conditions that have led us to this place so that we can understand where to intervene and how to change it. They're patterns that keep repeating and repeating, and we need to understand them. So, you know, I've been doing studies around this and working with people in communities and students. And so if you give me the next slide, I'll start to talk about some of the work really quickly. Oh, so back, okay. So the mission, thank you, of the ambassadors group, just for you to know, is to engage in a truth finding process that is both gathers and disseminates information about the history of discriminatory housing practices in Providence, that continue imbalance of power between tenants, landlords, and homeowners, and the ways in which BIPOC communities have been disproportionately impacted by both historical and continuing predatory practices. And this information will be used to advocate for and implement more just and equitable housing policies. Okay, next slide. So some of the things that I've worked on for a number of years is actually creating a timeline. And this timeline is really starts from the beginning, because we really have to understand is how the ideology of the founding of this country actually really is part of why we live these conditions right now. So, but I'm not going to go through the timeline because we don't have a long time, but it, you know, it starts back in the 1600s. Actually go forward on it. I'm actually going to show a couple of things in the timeline. So, you know, but okay, just advance forward on it if you can. Just see the arrow. Can you see the arrow? I'm on the right side of the screen. Sometimes if the screen is blown up, you might not be able to see it. Okay, keep going. Just go, 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 go. I want you to get to about the 1800s and the riots. And you know, there are other groups that are doing some of this work. Hard Scrabble. So these are some of the riots that displaced and burned the African American communities, homes. You know, in Hard Scrabble around North Main, which is close to the Mount Hope community. A lot of the work I'm looking at is the East Side. And next one, if you look at Snowtown and you understand Snowtown, it really was the reason that Providence was actually formally established as a city. The police force was formed as in the city, and our current ward system. So this is the history that is founded on the destruction of Black homes. Keep going forward. I'm going to really quickly look at Keep going. I want to look at looking at lipid. If you not look at lipid first looking at the highway. Keep going. Keep going. So there's lots of history in here. Keep going. And so that's the redlining. Go back to the redlining. So a lot of people know about redlining and the map. And so if you point down at the first red line towards the southern half of the map, that's Fox Point. The northern part is, the other one is around North Main and spreading over to the west side. But if you can see all of Rhode Island, if you know anything about redlining, it's really, this is the hazardous or the risky places for investment, and loans were denied to communities in these areas, and helped to start the formations of segregation and ghettoization of our town. Next slide. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Quickly, quickly. How am I doing on time? Am I running out of my 5 minutes? These are all issues of displacement, and many people know about, stop there. This is in Fox Point, where some of the first destruction of communities of color, because that was where they started putting in, it says I-95, but it's actually 195, but it was the first destruction, that along with the Providence Preservation Society, that actually displaced the communities from Fox Point. Go to the next slide, and let's find Lipid Hill. Right here. This was an amazing, this actually, once we looked at a lot of this work, you could see how when what Baldwin called you know, Negro removal, when he said that was really what urban renewal was about. This was a devastating time. This was the heart of the Black community on the East Side. It was the largest Black concentration community, and in the 1950s, and this being in the late 1950s and early and then 60s through the 60s, removed a whole swath, a whole community, bulldozed it, and removed and displaced, and not only displaced that family, but displaced the businesses and so forth. So these are some of the things that we really want to look at, is how these things had changed. And we had another slide which the mayor had shown us, that there's a historical map that you can look at. It's not that can show you, the highway being built, how people were then moved west and south. And people don't understand that this was some of the original insult of shaping the city and separating the east side from the south and the west. Okay, we can go on to just some of the most recent research we're doing if you go into that Black family. So I've been worked with a course with students that we actually just scroll down. This is on a website of work that's been done by students. And the last contribution that we had, this is a website that has all of a collection of between urban studies and Africana studies, the course that I've taught and worked on, looking at some of the legacies of how Brown has influenced the shaping of the East Side. We have one presentation. This is actually going to be a full report, but we already do have the presentations that were presented last May online, and you see we do look at evictions. And if you when you look at evictions, the places that the most evictions are happening are still in the areas where they're mostly Black and Brown communities. If you go to and so that was, you saw this, the historical, the maps. Let's see, what's the last thing I was going to talk about? Because I'm going to get, so, this is just to let you know that while, I'm doing a lot of the focus on the East Side, it's really for us to understand, it is a model for us to actually look at other communities. The evictions we had a smaller number. There's not as many people evicted from the East Side, but they're still being evicted. And it gives us a model of how to look at these issues. We want you to get involved. And so, and you can learn more about this. We'll be providing these slides for you, so you can look at these sites and learn more about it. But if you want to join the African American Ambassadors Group, there's will be the link for you to join and tell your name, and so that you can actually become more involved with this work that we're doing. We are a voice. We're going to amplify the voice of what has, the stressed communities, and a lot of this work has been done over and over and over again, and hopefully we're going to be able to pull all of this research together and document it, and and change the structure so that we don't continue to repeat this. I just want to make one thing again. Looking at the East Side, we do know what's happened in the Jewelry District, and how the move of now moving and opening up to the Jewelry District is that expansion of the East Side, now that it's seems something that that is desirable for certain populations, but then is now having pressure to the north end of the South Side and causing evictions there. All right, I think that's it. I hope I stayed within my time, more or less.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for all of that historical context, Dr. Ritchie. Just so all of the attendees know, the entire slideshow presentation will be available after the presentation, so that you will have access to all the links. I did drop the link specifically to join the African American Ambassadors Group into the chat right now. And yeah, we really have, we really do want to focus on the fact that this has housing instability in Providence has been an issue for a long time. And the COVID-19 pandemic has really just exacerbated the situation we've already been in. And to talk about the CDC eviction moratorium, which is one way that you can prevent evictions, specifically for issues of non-payment. We have Jennifer Wood and Jordan McMinn from Rhode Island Center for Justice.
Hey everybody. Not exactly sure how to move the slides.
You can just go ahead and say next. They'll move them for you.
All right, so let's get to the first slide. Who's eligible? So, hi everybody. My name is Jordan McMinn. I'm the supervising attorney at the Rhode Island Center for Justice, and thanks for joining us today. We just wanted to share a little bit of information with you about a current eviction moratorium that applies to renters who are at risk of eviction due to non-payment of rent. Just a quick word on that. In Rhode Island, there are essentially two different reasons why somebody might get evicted. One of them is for not paying the rent, and then the other one is for reasons other than non-payment of rent. Maybe they're staying beyond the date that they were supposed to vacate the apartment, or maybe there are some other reasons, noise complaints or issues like that. This moratorium only applies to cases that are about non-payment of rent. And what this slide says is who's eligible for that protection. And essentially there are 5 requirements that you need to be able to affirmatively answer yes to in order to be eligible. And each of those are listed here. The first one is that you've used all of your best efforts to obtain government assistance for rent and housing. And that means that you've tried to apply for rental assistance. You're going to hear more about that later during the presentation today. So the first thing you need to do is try to pay your rent, essentially. Have you applied for assistance? The second thing, do you earn less than $99,000 this year? And if you're a household filing a joint tax return, then it's $198,000, still the same $99,000 per person per year. The next one is the key question: are you unable to pay your rent due to a substantial loss of income, a loss of hours, wages, a layoff, or extraordinary out-of-pocket expenses, which essentially means extraordinarily high medical expenses that prevented you from being able to pay your rent. Many people, unfortunately, might be living with a fixed income source like a Social Security check or something along those lines. and it's possible that some folks might actually not have experienced a loss of hours or wages because they're not working, and may have to consider or think through pretty quickly or thoroughly whether they can answer yes to that question. The fourth one, also use best efforts to make your full or partial rent payments. So this means that you need to pay what you can afford to pay in your own best judgment. Obviously, the point of the moratorium is it's aware of the fact that folks have priorities, and you got to pay for medicine, you got to pay for food, you've got other important expenses. Based on your own evaluation of your budget, are you able to make some payment toward your landlord? And if so, you're required to do so. It's not going to give you a fixed dollar amount that's required. It's just whether you're using your best efforts to make full or partial rent payments. And then the last one, I think, is generally an easy yes for most folks. But the question is, are you likely to become homeless? Are you going to need to move into a homeless shelter or essentially live in an overcrowded household if you were to be evicted? And if you can answer yes to each of these 5 things, then you're going to be eligible to sign a declaration form. And I think our next slide's going to talk more about that. So Jen, I don't know if you want to jump in and talk a little bit about how to do this.
Sure. So Jordan already described to you what the 5 questions are basically, and those 5 questions appear right on the form. The way that the Center for Disease Control set up this moratorium was to say it's not healthy to evict people during a pandemic, so we're going to, on a nationwide basis, prevent evictions for non-payment of rent through December 31st. And in order, what they didn't do was make that automatic. So the one way they could have approached it is to issue that order from the CDC and say, you just can't file an eviction for non-payment of rent from now till the end of the year. Instead of doing that, the CDC, in its wisdom, chose this other method, which really requires this kind of screening tool that tenants have to fill out. And so one of the things we're really trying to get the word out in the public is that even though people may have heard that there's a CDC moratorium, they should not assume that that's automatic. The only way to be protected is to actually sign this piece of paper, a declaration that states the 5 questions that Jordan just reviewed. Basically, you assert what your income level is, that you've suffered some economic hardship, that you're trying to pay your rent, that you can't pay your rent. If a tenant is able to sign that form truthfully, then they need to present it to their landlord or a person that works for the landlord. So a lot of people never see their actual landlord. They see the person who comes to collect the rent or with whom they communicate if there's a problem in the apartment, if the plumbing breaks. Whoever it is that is the landlord's representative, they have to provide the form to that person. And if there's been any kind of court action where there's been something filed and you've received something from the court, then it would be very important to also get a copy of that declaration to the court. When you would know, because when a court pleading is served on you, it would describe where the court is and give the address. So it's an easy enough thing. Once the declaration is signed, be sure to keep a copy of it and provide it both to someone for the landlord and also for the court, if there's a court proceeding ongoing. Finally, keeping a copy of that declaration is critically important, because the way the courts in Rhode Island are interpreting the CDC moratorium, even if you've already had a court proceeding and a judge ruled that you could be evicted, and the constable is coming to your house to change the locks and move you out, if you present the CDC declaration signed to the constable, in other words, at any stage in the eviction process, that will put the process on hold until December 31st. Next slide. So this was simply providing you the actual language of what the CDC published in the Federal Register to legally make this moratorium effective nationwide. Next slide. And now I'm going to hand it back to Jordan. There are a number of questions that we thought people would have and that we've been asked many times. So we'll walk through some of those. And then I know there may be other questions that our moderator can share with us.
So I sort of alluded to this at the beginning, but I just wanted to go over this because, again, we are talking to lots of tenants who are asking questions about these things. And these are some of the most common questions that we're getting. Does the moratorium apply to evictions for reasons other than non-payment? The answer is no. And it seems a little unfair, and I tend to agree that it is, but it is the situation that we've got. So folks that are unable to pay their rent are currently protected by the moratorium. Folks that are current on their rent but getting evicted for some other reason are not protected by the moratorium. Am I covered if I receive Social Security? And the answer there is maybe. Each person really needs to uniquely, individually assess their personal household circumstances. Remember, if you're living in a household, the questions on the form are asking whether anyone in your household has experienced a substantial loss of income. So maybe one person in the home is receiving disability benefits, but somebody else in the household experienced a loss of income or a reduction in hours, and that sort of thing would qualify them. If it's a single individual in a household relying on a single disability check, and they've experienced no change in their income at all, and they've experienced no expenses or anything like that, then the answer, unfortunately, might be that they're not eligible. So, I do my best to find any way under the sun to get eligibility to help folks, but we also have to remind ourselves that this is under penalty of perjury, and when I'm giving legal advice, I'm going to give you my honest opinion, not just the answer you want to hear. So the reason this is in there is because there are situations where this moratorium, unfortunately, may not protect some folks. Next slide. So again, if you read through the actual declaration form itself, it does talk about some penalties and consequences. And the thing I'll say here, will I be arrested if I sign the declaration? But it turns out that I'm not covered. Perjury has always been a crime, and many folks are signing things all of the time under penalty of perjury. And the key to most criminal laws is that somebody intended to violate them. To commit the crime of perjury, you generally need to knowingly intend to convey false information to somebody. And some of these questions here aren't always so straightforward. So it's not always, a clear-cut case of whether somebody is telling a lie or telling the truth or telling something in between. So, the point here is that nobody should be intentionally, deceitfully filling these forms out. If you think this form applies to you and you think the answer is yes, 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 you should sign it and deliver it. And I would expect that it would provide protection. This last one's important, and it sort of rolls into what I was talking about earlier. Can I stop paying rent if I provide my landlord with a declaration? Again, as a lawyer, I could say, yes, you can stop paying rent if you provide your landlord with a declaration. The declaration will protect you from eviction through the end of the year. The moratorium and the declaration form itself very specifically says that you are supposed to pay your rent to the extent that you are able to. It does not suspend the obligation to pay rent. It does not change the terms of your rental agreement. It does not prevent your landlord from charging you late fees or penalties or anything like that. So this is just a short-term protection to prevent people from displacement during the pandemic. It's not intended to relieve anybody of their rental responsibilities, which is another reason why it's so important that folks follow through with the first step, which is applying for rental assistance, which I'm going to defer the rest of my time to so that you guys can hear more about how to access that program. So again, the moratorium ends at the end of December, and like I said, there's no waiver of rent, so happy to take any questions later when we get
Great, thank you guys. And now we're going to go to Kyle Bennett with United Way of Rhode Island to talk a little bit about rental assistance in Safe Harbor housing program.
Great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to spend a few minutes talking about the Safe Harbor program. As you heard Jordan mention, if you're having trouble paying your rent, you've experienced the conditions that were described earlier, the Safe Harbor program is here to help. If you currently have applied to the program or you're working with other tenants that have applied and they're still waiting on an answer, just hold on. We're going to get to you. I promise you. We will get through every application that has been submitted to date and those who are coming. So the program is simply an eviction diversion program designed to help landlords and tenants who have been unable to resolve the dispute prior to our intervention. It's a $7 million program. We've provided some resources for our legal partners to expand their capacity slightly to do more of the work that's needed to ensure that tenants can stay housed safely and that landlords receive the compensation that's due to them in partnership with the program. There are several ways you can enter. You can call us at 211 if you don't have access to a computer or can't get to our website. If you do have access to the internet and can get to our website, you can simply go to the 211 website and apply through the Safe Harbor program or Google Safe Harbor Housing Program, and our website will come up. It's a pretty simple application. You can also be referred. The court system is working in partnership with the program, not in partnership, in collaboration with the program to support, again, maintain tenancy, and they will refer legal representatives or tenants to the program to cover any arrears that they may find or judgments that may be ordered. And on the back end, if folks participate in this program, the court has assured us that if you've already moved through the legal system, that they will dismiss and seal a record. And this protects both the landlord and tenants. If you're a tenant and you're researching a landlord and you find that they have evicted numerous tenants in the past, you may not want to rent from that individual. If you're a tenant who's also been taken to eviction court but has been found not guilty and maintain your tenancy, it also prevents future landlords from looking at this as a blemish on your housing record. So we think this benefits both parties. We've talked a little bit about the qualifications. Both tenant and landlord have to go through the application process. We think this probably is the best approach because it is, again, a partnership, and ultimately the two parties have to enter into agreement with United Way under the guideline of this program. The program is designed to serve people at 80% of the area median income or below, and I like to use a family size of 4. That's about $70,000 for most Rhode Islanders. As you can see, the income limit varies from city to city, with those on the lower end being slightly higher and those on the higher end, the majority of Rhode Island cities being $69,600 or $700, depending on what month you research this number. And some of the reasons for the financial hardship, a large majority, it says other, but there are numerous subcategories in that field. But the large majority of folks have been either laid off or had reduced hours because of COVID. But as you'll also notice, there are people who can't return to work for something like childcare. If childcare is a significant burden, you have
trabajo porque no tienen cuidado para sus niños.
Your children's school is out of session or they're learning remotely. That's a valid reason for not being able to go back to work. And in some cases, it's provided the loss of income that allows you to become eligible for this program. And then, of course, you see your place of employment closed or your job was terminated. Any number of reasons that are described here and many, many others that are listed under the other section are valid for application to this process, to this program. When I look at the demographics of who's applied and think about Dr. Danny's presentation earlier, you'll notice we have separated race and ethnicity according to the state guideline and federal guideline, where you see the percentage of applicants who are white is 48.82%. Those who are Black is 21.74. Those who prefer not to answer, 24.04. Native Americans 3.4%, and Alaska Natives, as well as Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders at around 1%, and a similar size population for Asian Americans. You know, when I look at the disparity here, there's a significantly disproportionate amount of Black or African American applicants, as we represent somewhere between 6 and 8%, depending on, again, who's counting and which day of the week it is, of the Rhode Island population. Yet 21% of the applicant pool happens to be Black. This, I think, goes to, again, the notion of congregated neighborhoods and the, I forget the term that you used, Dr. Danny, but the removal of the Negro. It's something that we should be concerned with, certainly. As I look at the Hispanic or Latino or non-Hispanic or Latino populations, you know, we notice, again, many of these folks are represented both in the Black, the white, and I prefer to not answer question or column. But at the same time, thinking about the size and demographics for applicants versus Rhode Islanders, it's, again, a disproportionate size of a number of Rhode Islanders who are applying to this fund. So it's like to think about that, not for today necessarily, but as we think a little bit more about what's to come. So you heard Jordan say that we should apply to the Safe Harbor program. We were designed as a byproduct of the Housing Help Rhode Island program. So for those of you who may have applied or new people who applied to Housing Help, they look to serve a distinct population. Those folks who were already homeless, those who were doubled up in living arrangements or overcrowded environments, those who were released from state institutions, could be mental hospital, could be group home settings or other types of state care. And then those who have no real, no current living arrangement to speak of, as well as some folks who are currently housed that may need the arrearage support. The Safe Harbor program really was focused solely on those who are currently housed and thinking about how to best protect them by supporting them with legal support, but also thinking longer term about the legal implications and ramifications of having gone through the court system. So rolling this program out with the district court. So I think that while the two programs have a similar eligibility parameter, they again target slightly different populations. And now the Housing Help program the application portal is currently closed. While it may open again in the near future, we're also encouraging folks to apply for Safe Harbor because we may at some point have to close our application portal. So if you know someone that is on the verge, whether they are 1 month or 9 months behind, we encourage them to apply to Safe Harbor today. Any rental arrearage that began on or after March 1st is eligible for support through the Safe Harbor program. And some of the simple requirements, which you'll see also on our website for tenants, it's a copy of your current lease, photo ID, utility bill, personal check, or payroll statement. And we're introducing a new document as of tomorrow that will basically allow you to attest to the fact that you may not be able to provide any of these documents, that you may not have a photo ID, or you may not have a utility bill. It may be included with your lease, which is also expired, or you may have never had a lease. But we know that you have the ability to attest to these things, again, under perjury, the penalties of perjury, but also the fact, understanding that we want you to be successful in your home and to maintain your tenancy longer term. And secondly, thinking about proof of income, we look for, again, similar documents, pay stub, social security letter, any public entitlement or benefit program, as well as your checking and saving account documents that have your name and address are helpful. But we have a document that allows you to attest to this portion. If you do not have any of these documents, you can simply sign a declaration that attests to that fact, and we were able to move your application forward. So we want to remove the hurdles for people that have been the most significant barriers, and finding these documents for most of our applicants has been the most challenging piece. For landlords, you'll see that the requirement is very simple. We need a completed W-9, some sort of evidence rent to be owed, or rent that is owed, and we have what we call a back rent statement. Simple. It just says how much was owed for each month. beginning March 1st to the present. And then if you have a copy of the lease agreement, a copy of the eviction complaint, or a copy of your management contract, we're able to accept those as well. So this is a process map. It simply shows what happens if you need legal assistance, if you're not able to come to agreement with your landlord. Our United Way 211 call center specialists begin with the application process. We, as program staff, will work with you on creating the application and referral to our legal partners. Ultimately, they are amazing at what they do and are able to reach a joint agreement. Landlords and tenants finalize the agreement, and United Way processes the payment. And then if you've gone through the court system, the case will be dismissed and sealed. We believe that this is, again, helpful, as I described earlier, but also know that you will find it more helpful moving forward. This is just a document that shows if you are already engaged in legal process that your landlord has the ability to allow us to defer the case or postpone it for up to 6 weeks. I had a case this morning that we shared with the district court. I actually shared it last night in the district court, postponed the case until November 11th. So we know that the court is working with us on this program and hoping to keep people housed as we are as well. So we ask that you consider everything that has been shared today. Anyone, again, that you know that is in need of rental assistance or has been unable to pay their rent, please, 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 please ask them to apply to Safe Harbor today. I am happy to take questions, as I'm sure are the other panelists.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kyle.
Can I stop sharing?
Great. Again, thank you, everyone. So if anyone has any questions, you can enter them into the Q&A section. And I just want to thank everyone again for their participation. Let's see, did we have, there we go. I wanted to specifically state that if anyone has specific legal questions regarding your personal situation, you can direct them to Rhode Island Center for Justice at the phone number provided. You can call 211 or look at United Way online to get more info on the Safe Harbor Housing Program. And just for after the fact, all of the slides and recording will be available at this link provided. So the first question that we have was, can you qualify for Safe Harbor if the landlord refuses to participate?
So the answer to this one is a no. This program, again, is meant to be a partnership. However, I will say this, if you go to court, if the landlord refuses to participate and you sit in front of the chief judge or any of the 4 judges who are overseeing eviction court, and they ask you the question of whether or not you've applied to the Safe Harbor Housing Program and you say no as a landlord, they're going to tell you immediately, go back and work with Safe Harbor. They want to resolve this issue and know that litigation is the last way to resolve this issue. One, because there's no guarantee that the landlord will ever recoup 6, 7, 8, or 9 months of rental arrears that folks haven't been able to pay. And secondly, because they've worked, again, in partnership with us in designing this program so that we would be able to meet the needs of both landlords and tenants.
I would just add to that, just to reinforce Kyle's point about what would happen in court, because under Rhode Island law, most tenants have a right to cure, meaning they have a right to pay whatever is past due and have their case dismissed. So for a landlord to go to court suing a tenant for back rent, and then the tenant comes into court and says, the landlord refused to participate in the governor's rent relief program, which would have paid him in full. That's an unusual and difficult thing that they're going to have to explain to the court about why they refused to participate. So I know that, and Kyle can also attest to this, there has been a lot of challenges working with landlords and tenants to get all of the information completed. And there are definitely some rumors and misunderstandings about the program. So I think that usually when we have barriers with landlords who are not willing to work with the program, we're usually able to get to the bottom of it or figure out that there's probably some other reason going on other than unemployment.
Great, thank you. The next question that we had is, can a landlord raise the rent several times in a single year?
So I'll grab that one. The rules for rent increases are pretty straightforward. If you have a lease or a rental agreement for a period of time, that agreement can't be changed by either party until that rental agreement concludes. If you're on a month-to-month agreement or a week-to-week agreement, essentially each month or rental period is a brand new period of rental period. So under the law, a landlord is allowed to raise the rent as long as they provide adequate advance notice. And in most situations, that's at least 30 days notice in advance. So you can imagine a situation where the landlord might try to raise the rent each monthly rental period. It would not be illegal. It would be strange and unusual. It would raise concerns about why they're doing it, because sometimes it might be retaliatory or discriminatory. So not all notices of rent increase are lawful. There are some defenses, but a general answer is yes, a landlord could try to change the terms of the rental agreement in each rental period.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, you know, one of the things that we talk about in eviction and eviction studies are all of the ways that there's non-formal evictions, and that is so evictions are really undercounted, and raising rents are one of the ways that we don't see that people have to leave or move or kicked out because, you know, they don't have an eviction, but their rent keeps getting raised, and so they're forced to leave. And so, you know, and then there's other ways that are, you know, not legal that people will do non-formal ways of evictions that don't get counted. So even if when we're looking at this stuff and we're studying it, we're still grossly uncounting it. And we just need to have people who are actually looking at that and documenting that by being, you know, in the community and knowing of the community and being able to track that type of information.
Thank you, Dr. Ritchie, for emphasizing that point. I know that the Tenant network has also been really trying to focus on the fact that there are issues outside of formal evictions that also need to be dealt with in the housing sphere. Our next question is, how will residents know how to get the CDC moratorium declaration?
I'll just share. There are two ways. One, we're participating in a distribution of the declaration for everyone that's been involved in court filing since the 2nd of June. But more importantly, all of you on this call today have the option and opportunity to really promote this widely with every tenant, every resident, every landlord that you're connected to. At United Way, my organization will be sharing the declaration out with the guidance that's been provided by Center for Justice and Rhode Island Legal Services, and we'll be emailing it out also to everybody in our database. So we ask you to do the same. Everyone in your contact list, everyone in your cell phone, you know, just feel free to share this declaration and the companion piece that goes with it that shares your rights and opportunities.
I'll also jump in here. The link at the bottom, this tiny URL, is to the city's housing resource guide. There is a direct link to the declaration in both English and Spanish right there. So you can find it there too.
Thank you. How will landlords be protected under the CDC eviction moratorium?
I'll kill the awkward silence there by just mentioning that it unfortunately does not provide landlords any protection. It's something that we're all still very seriously, actively working on. We need foreclosure relief in Rhode Island.
Absolutely, thank you for that. What are students' rights if parents have to move between districts or lose their home?
So I can jump in on that one. There's a federal law that absolutely protects the right of students to continue to attend their home school, the school where they resided before they became homeless, when and if they become homeless. So Rhode Island has fully implemented that law, and any student in a public school in Rhode Island can continue to attend their school, even if their family loses their home in that community.
Thank you, Jen. That's great information to know. What should I do if I receive an eviction, a 10-day notice or another eviction notice?
So anybody that gets served with an eviction notice can contact the Rhode Island Center for Justice or Rhode Island Legal Services, which is another civil legal aid office providing free civil legal services to people facing eviction. I'll just say as a sense now, Rhode Island Legal Services focuses a bit more on public housing and subsidized housing cases, and the Center for Justice is a little bit more in the private market, but both of our offices are available. I see our phone number in the background right now. So one, you can contact one of our offices, but the other thing you can do is review the information we talked about earlier, figure out whether that moratorium applies to you. And if you get that declaration to your landlord and over to the court, that's going to stay your eviction until January. So that's one important thing to remember. And another thing to remember is that ignoring your eviction is not going to make it go away. So please contact our office, or at the very least, you need to reach out to your attorney, the attorney representing the landlord, and let them know you exist and that you matter and that you're doing the best that you can.
And I would just add to that, only because I'm seeing or hearing these responses from applicants to Safe Harbor. If a landlord or their representative tells you that you don't have to go to court, don't listen. Don't listen to that at all, because if you don't show up, you could find yourself facing a judgment against you because you weren't there to defend yourself. So read the declaration, submit it to your landlord, submit it to the court, contact Rhode Island Legal Services, contact the Center for Justice. If you have any questions, you're not sure where to go, call 211. We can get you to the right partners in time to mitigate any potential eviction.
The next question we have is, what type of assistance can homeowners get, particularly seniors on fixed income or unemployed?
So the focus of this has really been for tenants, but I will just say in general that homeowners need to call their bank or their mortgage servicer to discuss the situation with them, because unfortunately the options really do vary depending on what your mortgage, who has your mortgage and what the terms of it are. So that can be very complicated and would be more appropriate, I think, for another conversation.
Thank you for that. What would happen if my landlord claimed I didn't submit the CDC declaration or claimed that I was lying about my eligibility?
So I can jump in on this one, and maybe Jordan will expand upon my answer. But the first piece, obviously, there's always a question of proving that you've given someone something. Providing it to your landlord and keeping a copy, and even making a note on your copy that says provided to my landlord on this date, is a helpful way to back yourself up if it later becomes a contested question of whether you actually provided that. But if you've been provided with any kind of paperwork from the court that you're being served with an eviction, then absolutely provide it to the court, because that is considered to be a duplication of providing it to the landlord. And as long as it's on file with the court, you cannot the case cannot move forward. So that's critically important. And then keep another copy so that if anyone else comes and questions whether you've presented to your landlord, you can provide it to someone working for the landlord or the sheriff in the worst case scenario, if there's actually a case that went forward and you're at the point of being moved out of your home. A lot of people have asked us about this question of being accused of lying on the declaration. And I've tried to think of a really clear way to describe how that would work. And I think Jordan mentioned it earlier. All of us file all sorts of forms with the government on a regular basis, tax forms, other kinds of applications for licenses, et cetera, that are signed, that are verified that we're telling the truth under penalties of perjury. And the declarations that Kyle mentioned earlier in the Safe Harbor program, verifying income and other circumstances similarly are filed in just the same way. Basically, it would be very difficult to get in trouble or face criminal prosecution for a question of interpretation. And so when you look at the things that are on that form that need to be certified to, I'm going to contrast two of them, one of which is easily verifiable and the other one is open to interpretation. So if you say on that form that you're making your best effort to pay the rent in light of all your other financial obligations, that's a matter of interpretation. If you are making a reasonable effort, and later if someone were to ask you about it, like let's say a judge in January after the moratorium is over, you would be able to say, well, this is all the income I had. I lost my job. I didn't have enough money to buy food for my kids and to pay for gas for my car to go on job interviews and to pay the rent. But I made a partial payment of rent. That's a matter of interpretation, and it would be very, very rare for someone to be able to be prosecuted for perjury in a question where was it reasonable? You know, did you do the thing that you said you did? On the other side of that equation, one of the things you have to say is, I made less than $99,000 last year. Well, you're going to get some kind of statement through the tax system, either a W-2 form or 1099, that says this is how much earnings you had last year. And, you know, it can be a little more complicated than that, but basically that's a fact. It can be relatively easily verified as to whether or not you made a certain amount of money in the preceding year. And so that's the kind of difference that I wanted to highlight when you think about how people sign a form under penalty of perjury. If it's a matter of interpretation and you have reasonably stated to the best of your ability a truthful declaration, that is not a prosecutable behavior. If it's something that can be later verified, obviously we would never advise someone to sign a form where they're not stating the answer truthfully. So hopefully you may find that many landlords, and we've already heard this, say, oh, well, I think you should have paid more towards your rent, or I think you could have paid more, or I think you didn't lose as much income as you thought you lost. That's a matter of disputed fact and interpretation. And so that's really not what is usually referred to when we think about signing a form under the penalties of perjury. So I hope that that helps to clarify the situation a bit.
Thank you, Jen. That was a really great explanation. I know we've heard a lot of people concerned on that front. Our next question is, if I'm on a month-to-month lease and behind on rent due to COVID-19, and the landlord sends me a termination of tenancy notice not citing non-payment, can I still qualify for the eviction moratorium?
Unfortunately, that's an easy no. There's certainly questions about whether they're retaliating or using a back door, but it's a door that was left open by the moratorium. And all I'll say on that is that in truth, that the eviction for reasons other than non-payment process takes longer. And if they were just starting that process now, they wouldn't actually be able to get somebody evicted by the end of the year anyway. So, you know, if you're in that situation, definitely reach out to our office and we'll have to figure out a strategy, but no.
And I want to emphasize, you should still apply for rental assistance through Safe Harbor, because regardless of what the justification is that the landlord is using, you're still behind on rent. And that's going to become a problem after the moratorium, even if it's not what is being relied upon by the landlord when they file the papers.
Great, thank you. What about cases with private landlords where there may not be a legal agreement or lease?
So this is one of my favorites to talk about because there's this really strong pervading myth about I don't have an agreement, I don't have a lease. That's simply not true. If you exchange money for keys, you have a legal rental agreement. And the Rhode Island Landlord Tenant Act has entire provisions talking about unwritten agreements, and it actually provides the terms of those unwritten agreements. So the question says just in generally, what about? There's not really a what about what, but I'll say that in general, everything that we've been talking about so far today applies to cases with private landlords where there may not be a written lease or a written agreement.
Our next question actually is specifically on that front. It's I don't have a lease and my landlord says I have to leave because he wants his property back. How can I prevent my family from being kicked out?
So that's a great follow-up. Yes, you do have a lease. You have an unwritten rental agreement, and the Landlord Tenant Act states very clearly what can be done to terminate a rental agreement. So the landlord needs to provide written notice stating that the rental agreement that you currently have is going to terminate at the end of its current rental period. If it's a month-to-month agreement, then a valid 30-day notice that's sent on October 6th would be effective for the end of November. If they sent a notice on in September, it would be valid for the end of October. And anybody that's remaining in the property beyond the date listed in that written letter, then an eviction could be filed the following month. And that would be an eviction for reasons other than non-payment, which is the sort of case I was just talking about that takes a little bit longer to work its way through the system. So again, please, it sounds like you're talking about your personal situation. We try to avoid giving personal legal advice out, but please give us a phone call and we'll see if we can work with you.
Thank you. Last question we have is, if I have a Section 8 voucher, can I be evicted?
So that's another very broad question. I would need to know more about why somebody's trying to evict you. There are lots of additional protections that Section 8 voucher holders have. So again, that's a personal thing that would probably require a deeper conversation.
I also wanted to specifically mention one question that was addressed in the chat, which is Safe Harbor still accepting applications? The answer is yes. And you can apply today. You can call 211 for information or go through the United Way of Rhode Island website to apply for Safe Harbor housing program.
Just
yes.
just one thought I have. I'm just thinking, I hate to interrupt. I'm just thinking the Section 8 voucher person. Anybody who has a Section 8 voucher who experiences a change in income at any point in time ever for the history of the Section 8 program, whether it was during COVID or not, should always know that they can contact the housing authority and report the change in their income to have their voucher changed so that their rent payment is reduced appropriately. So I just wanted to say that for anybody else that might have Section 8.
Great, thank you so much for that clarification. It looks like those are all of the questions that we have. I want to thank everyone for their participation and to remind everyone who is in attendance that we will have the slideshow and recorded presentation available. You'll be able to get all of the links and cited information that we had presented today. And I wanted to thank everyone for coming.
Elena, there's one more question that just came.
We have another question. So our last is, what is the date where my situation would consider being protected under the COVID guidelines? If I have had issues with rent after the pandemic, would I be more likely than if it was in February?
So that's a little bit confusing, but I'm going to try and help out with this. There are people who may have already been falling behind on their rent before the pandemic, and the pandemic typically would refer to the period from March forward. But if your difficulty continues during the pandemic and can be shown to be related to the pandemic, so you may have already been behind on your rent because actually there's an affordable housing crisis in our state that pre-exists this pandemic. So many people were already struggling with their housing before the pandemic. That doesn't mean that you're not eligible for assistance for your continuing struggles during the pandemic, and particularly if you can show a relationship that the situation became worse during the pandemic because of some of the factors that were listed: loss of income, extraordinary medical expenses, if you became sickened or ill, if you had a household member who lost their job, then you would be eligible for that assistance. It just wouldn't apply prior to March in terms of applying for rental assistance, for example. It would only be for the period during the pandemic. But you're not disqualified from getting help simply because you were already struggling.
Thank you. Yeah, and that really does highlight something that I think we've all mentioned, which is that housing instability has been an issue in Providence and in Rhode Island as a whole for long before this pandemic came to us. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done in response to the crisis. There are a lot of things that that you can do if you need assistance right now. And I think there is a lot to be reimagined in the structure of our housing system moving forward. So anyone in attendance, feel free to reach out to anyone here. I'm sure that we would all love to have a longer conversation about, I guess, the future of housing in Rhode Island, especially to the Tenant Network Rhode Island. And yeah, I think that we're all set. Thanks you, everybody.